Okay, good morning. Thank you for joining me. My name is Amanda Moy. I'm a product advisor here at Latera, and I am excited today to talk to you about how Clocktimizer can help make your e-billing life easier. A little bit of background. So I joined Latera this past November, and before that, I spent 11 years working at enterprise level law firms in their back office in the billing and cash conversion work streams. Most recently, I was the Senior Billing Manager of Operations over at DLA Piper. And when I was first introduced to Clocktimizer, I absolutely understood, why it was we speak to our pricing teams and legal practice management teams about what Clocktimizer can do to help their lives. But over and over, I kept thinking, oh my goodness, I could have used this with my billing team, in particular when it came to electronic billing. And that's because out of the many things, the many complications e-billing adds to the law firm, it's the administrative pieces, the oversight that volume gives us that is particularly onerous. And so in our conversation today, I wanted to share 3 specific use cases on where Clocktimizer can help that part of your back office work stream. A little bit of background for those of you who perhaps aren't as familiar with e-billing as those of us from prior billing teams might have been. According to industry surveys, we're looking at about 90% of legal departments currently employing the use of electronic vendor sites to help with their internal department matter spends. This in turn means they look to our law firms to be their partners in that and ask that we use those systems as well. This now represents about 45% of US legal revenue are going through these systems. This is a pretty big jump. If you look to pre-pandemic levels, normally sat between maybe 20–25% of revenue. So we've seen a huge increase in the amount of work going through these systems. And this translates to a pretty tremendous impact because even with this increase of use, we're still looking at about a 30% rejection rate on invoices related to e-billing. That has been a number that has been hard to kick for law firms. We struggle with this. And when we start to dig in based upon feedback from law firms on what are driving these rejections, where do we most struggle, we see it sits with outside counsel guideline compliance. So our 3 use cases today that we're going to discuss are specifically speaking to some of the administrative areas that can be the most cumbersome to try to address. So let's go and take a look at Clocktimizer. So I'm in Clocktimizer right now, and we're going to live in primarily 2 different areas inside the system. I'm going to go into our budget section to talk about our first use case, which has to do with client requested forecasts. And this makes sense, right? Budgets, this is where we enter in values that we need to track matter spend against. And what is a forecast? But essentially a slightly less formal budget. So I've created an example where you have a client, you have perhaps one matter, many matters, hundreds, thousands of matters, where over the life of the matter, we're being requested to put together a period-based estimate, a forecast on what we expect the matter spend to be. So as you see on the screen, I've used our budget module to create a period-based budget. I've outlined the months as well as our estimated projections. Now, part of the value of going and being able to do this in Clocktimizer is you're memorializing this process in a way separate from what's going on the client vendor site. In that system, it's built for them as an audience. With Clocktimizer, you can cater it to what your law firm needs. And so I've pulled in a number of different metrics that are going to be helpful to me in having oversight on this forecast. I'm tracking ultimately what we're billing against our forecast. This is our promise to the client. We're saying this is where the matter spend is going to go. I need to make sure we're sticking to those commitments. But I've also pulled in metrics that are going to help me over the course of the matter spend. I can be proactive. What are my write-offs looking like? Am I keeping to my commitments, but is it at a great cost to the firm? Is there harm in here? Do we need to revise and reevaluate? I'm tracking our work values. What is actual work as compared to what we're billing? I'm also pulling in my work in progress because where there's a forecast, there is likely an accrual. And the accrual process can often have associated penalties related to missing due dates or even being off on what our accrual estimates look like. And then finally, the all-important number, all this work we're doing, are we actually getting paid for it? So I'm able to really tailor this to the things that might most interest me as a law firm. Now it's wonderful that I've memorialized it all here, right? I'm giving this order, I'm giving this organization, it's an internal system. But what's particularly helpful on the Clocktimizer side is I can now lean on some of our automated processes, including scheduling email updates. So all throughout Clocktimizer, we're able to schedule these automated messages to whichever audiences we want. We can have curated messages that include process recognition, assign ownership, allow you to establish accountability, and I could create 100 of these. I've created several as examples that we might use, and I'm going to go ahead and show those to you. But in addition, I've set up our triggers. I'm using our budget warnings to also automatically trigger attention according to a specific activity. So in this case, I've scheduled a budget warning to come up, grab my attention whenever we exceed what we forecasted. So whenever I bill more than what I forecasted for a particular month, it's going to immediately go to the audience I need to take action on this. And this is one of those areas where, because now we've created order, we've added some transparency, we have the opportunity to do the most important thing in our administrative role, and that is to ensure there's no harm to the client-partner relationship. Because the moment we start to exceed our forecasts, that's going to start impacting our client's own internal budgeting. This is how we demonstrate that we're good business partners on top of providing legal support. And so this trigger gives the opportunity for the partner to evaluate, why is our matter spend exceeding what we forecasted? Is this an internal management issue? Did we have some changeover in our associates and we need to be a little tighter in that review? How can I have that conversation with the client so they feel comfortable with this excess? But perhaps the substance of the work has changed altogether from when we first put together that forecast. Now we have the opportunity to communicate with the client, update our forecasts, lessen our write-offs, and lessen that risk to revenue. All excellent things. And so in terms of some of those scheduled updates, things that I can lean on from the Clocktimizer side, where instead of me having to go pull information, I can push information to the audiences who might be most interested. I've set up a weekly update. This is how I could drive attention from the partner, remind them there's our forecast, include their support staff, keep it aware and available and give that transparency. And it's scheduled, so I don't have to remember to go and do it every week. But let's also remember those accruals. The accrual piece is just the calendaring of it can be such a burden to a law firm. The more volume you have, the more matters, the more onerous this becomes. I can easily schedule, a nice update reminder. Hey, your accrual's in 3 days, pay attention. And then the actual doomsday reminder. Your due date's today. If we don't get this accrual in, bad things are going to happen. We're not going to get paid in full. And again, once I've scheduled all of these, I get to set it, it runs, it pushes that information, and it draws that attention. All things that give you more control over that process. Now, this use case, using Clocktimizer for a forecast, this makes sense. This is an easy adaptation of that budget module. So let's talk about one that perhaps is a little bit more creative. So our second use case, and this is for working timekeeper approvals. Now, when I have an outside counsel guideline and I start seeing the language about any new timekeepers being added to the matter requiring approval, I enter a sad place in my life. Any law firm does, because these approval processes, these translate to a tremendous timeline burden. If we're very lucky, it's an easy process. It's a conversation between the partner and the in-house counsel, and we're good to go. But that's a rarity. When we're dealing with an e-billing vendor, chances are it's going to require several steps. And the worst versions have that conversation. Then there's an email with probably a terrible spreadsheet that has to go to a special group over on the client side. And then finally, you have to upload it to the vendor themselves. And each of those points of approval represents days to bill that get lost. And a large part of this is because those actions often are triggered at the latest point in the review process, when you already have a pre-bill or pro forma in front of you. So when I was first really getting to know Clocktimizer, I was very curious, could we use this for the working timekeeper oversight? And the wonderful answer is yes, because the budget module, it's not just about budgeting. It is about any kind of matter spend oversight, including creating validation lists. So what do I mean by that? So If we look at our screen together here, I've created a structure where I've made a list of timekeepers, essentially a scoped list of which people are expected to accrue some kind of value on this matter, i.e. I've created my approved timekeeper list. And because Clocktimizer can be used to track out of scope work, and I've organized by timekeepers, anybody who begins work on this matter within 24 hours of their time entry, I'm going to get a very helpful alert. Once again, I'm able to lean on my warnings, and I'm going to be triggered. I'm going to be warned automatically. There's out of scope work. And in this case, out of scope translates to this unapproved timekeeper. So this allows me to be extremely proactive. I don't have to wait on my pre-bill. I don't have to wait on my pro forma. I don't have to be comparing against 1,000 different spreadsheets for every single client and matter I have this set up on. I have this organized in one clean place where the technology is giving me the muscle to be able to know when I need to act on it. But as helpful as that is, I wanted to see, could I make this any better? And the answer is yes again. So a couple things I've done, I've pulled in metrics that are going to make it much easier for me to review. Do we even need to get this timekeeper approved? So I've pulled in their work values. I pulled in their effective rate. What are they effectively billing in my financial system right now? Their hours. You might have a case assistant enter in 0.1 hours on a matter. Chances are that could be the one time they do it. Do we really need to hold up the whole bill, all of the payment, because of a one-time 0.1 hour low rate timekeeper? Chances are that answer is going to be no. I'm now equipped with the knowledge and information to be able to work with my partner to do that kind of evaluation. Now, to be clear, Clocktimizer is not a rate management tool, but it does include ways to be able to include some rate transparency. So one of the things I lean on in this use case is actually our rate editing tool. Now, our pricing teams will typically use this as a way to incorporate panel rates when they're putting together a pricing bid, or they're trying to calculate what the budget value should be when they're including a rate. But this also allows you the opportunity to memorialize what your timekeepers were actually approved at. This means I can now have a quick, easy way to double check. If they're approved at X rate, are we seeing that reflected in the financial system? Because many times we'll have all the rules, all the exceptions in place. The timekeeper will finally be approved, but maybe the revalue was done incorrectly, or maybe there was time transferred in between when I revalued and when I checked. We are working in massive financial systems, and you have lots of people in there touching things. It's such an easy point of discrepancy, and that's why we see so many rejections related to this kind of problem. I have a very easy way to arm my support staff to be able to see, okay, well, Brink's approved at 150. Why are we seeing an effective rate of 166? I can act upon that. I can also use this as a way to effectively manage that approval process. So when I got my alert that Wabe was unapproved, I'm able to also use the system to essentially capture what's moving through. I've had the conversation with the partner. We've determined that Wabe should be submitted at a $450 hourly rate. The moment the client approves them, my way to know that I have my approved timekeeper, I'm able to effectuate that just by accounting for their hours. This means that on the weekly update I've scheduled with my helpful email update tool, I'm going to be able to track, is Wabe approved yet or not? If I'm working with multiple teams and we're using this system together, I have a way to capture that actual action and activity so that I can rely once again on this weekly delivery or daily delivery that lets me know which timekeepers are approved, which are not, where they sit in the process, what values are associated with them. Many opportunities are created just by having this level of organization. And again, leaning on some of that automation that Clocktimizer offers with these scheduled alerts and triggers. So, I've really liked this example because it demonstrates a lot of the adaptability and versatility you get from Clocktimizer. If you can resituate how you think, how you set up these budgets to think of it more as a matter spend tracking mechanism, you can really expand upon the working approval timekeeper situation to a number of others that might be creating issues or challenges in your firm currently. But Wabe has not been approved yet, so I I'm going to leave him there as out of scope. So when I get my weekly update, I know to not bill out his time. Because why is this so important to a firm? This is important because if I include Wabe's time, my best case scenario is that we just get short paid for his time. The more likely situation is that all the work gets rejected. It all gets kicked back. And now I'm starting this duplicative process where maybe I'm going to have to resubmit time and time again. I'm going to hit a stale time flag. I'm going to hit challenge after challenge. And as much as that's a burden for my billing team, the larger firm impact is that now we've expanded our days to bill, we've impacted our days to collect, and our collection realization has definitely taken a hit. This all hits revenue, this all hits firm budget numbers. All bad things, but all things that with Clocktimizer, there's an opportunity to address and improve. So this takes us though to our third use case. This is the one where, in particular, I feel proud to be able to talk about because it's where Clocktimizer can really, really shine. So when we have conversations with clients about, why do we use Clocktimizer? Why is it so helpful? We talk in particular about the technology that Clocktimizer relies on, natural language processing. So to simplify that, Clocktimizer is able to look at your time card data. Think of, your time card lines, the kind of data points you work with. We work with dates, we work with timekeepers, we work with hours, amounts, and rates. What we don't often think of as a data point are the time card narratives. And that's because they're full of words, and it's not just words, but words that are organized in a way that you have hundreds of thousands of timekeepers finding new ways to put together those letters and those phrases. It's a hard thing to quantify and analyze. But natural language processing says, yes, we can actually give that value, we can give that context. You can analyze that information. And so Clocktimizer has relied upon years and years of industry feedback, our client firms giving us additional feedback and tweaks from real life experience. And we've created this massive taxonomy that you're now able to lean on and say, give me value, help me understand these narratives. So now think your outside counsel guidelines, think in your head of those pages you go to where they start listing all the things they don't want your narratives to say and all the things they do want it to say. This is one of the areas of the greatest difficulty we have in actually adhering to. And there's some technology out there that helps with time entry. We do things internally like creating keyword reports and so on to try to help with that. But ultimately, it's only as good or expansive as we can try to make it. We don't have technology that we can employ on an individualized basis or of a level of intuition that you can see Clocktimizer do with its algorithm. And so I wanted to create a couple examples of how you can use Clocktimizer to really help with the timekeeping component of your OCG adherence. And so let me talk through those just a little bit. So the first one is probably the scenario you're most comfortable with. So I've used Clocktimiser's drill down utility. This is a power pivot tool that supports analysis and review in Clocktimizer. It also allows you to create reports that, once again, can be scheduled and automated for delivery. So this is probably something that most likely your firm has created some version of this. And this is a report where it's driven by keywords. We've learned in this example that this client hates the word drafting. If we include the word drafting, they're going to short pay or reject our invoices, both unfortunate outcomes. So I've created a simple report where Clocktimizer is able to look at keywords. We can create a nice long list and create this time card report with all those narratives that have this errant keyword. Nice thing about this scenario here is I can schedule this report to run every day. And I actually recommend that kind of urgency when you are first instituting any kind of timekeeping oversight, because the value isn't for your billing team to go and find all of the drafting instances and replace it. The value is to be able to speak, with our timekeeper, Cheryl here, and ensure that whatever time she enters in tomorrow doesn't include this word. Because we don't want our teams to be spent in this everlasting cycle of just replacing words. What we want is the timekeeping to improve. So I can use Clocktimizer to really instill the right level of urgency and attention to drive timekeeper behavior changes. And so this is keyword driven. This is something we're familiar with. A similar area of narrative control that we hit problems that we see plenty of rejections related to are going to be task and activity codes, phase codes. And so Clocktimizer can be used to help with identifying those kind of errant codes that exist, a very kind of similar to the keyword matching. And the reason why this occurs, it's not because we don't necessarily know that we can't use that task code or that phase code, but there's a huge level of maintenance in those lists. Sometimes we don't learn what's good or bad until the client starts rejecting. We might update it for the list for one matter, but maybe that doesn't get updated for all the matters on the client. A lot of this is reactive. It's not going through some nice orderly process. Clocktimizer, once again, can give you that opportunity to respond within 24 hours, correct your lists, work with timekeepers. Again, you have that proactive element. And that's because I can not only create this report to find it, I can then schedule it for automated delivery. Now let's take this one more step up. Let's start actually leaning into that natural language processing that Clocktimizer gives you. And we're talking about human language. So in this example, the client has told us, we will not accept any narratives that have work to do with project management. In a traditional method, that means I might create, like that first report, I'm going to look for narratives that have the keyword project, keyword management, maybe both. Well, Clocktimizer says, hey, that's great, but there's so many things that we can compose together that are going to translate to project management. And so I can instead build this report and say, show me all time cards where you're finding work according to the language that actually human beings use that signify project management. And so in this example, you can see these narratives here. They say updates and progress status updates. Nowhere in that narrative does it say project or management. But because we're leaning on that technology, we know these are entries that the client is going to say, no way, no dice. This creates a major opportunity because it's not about, okay, let's write these entries off. Let's make sure that they don't end up on the bill. The real opportunity here is how can we convey the value from this work so that the client will want to pay for it. And so we're able to see in one go, all these hours have been spent on this project management activity. This translates to actual value for the client. We may just need to improve our language to convey that. Maybe it's a conversation between the partner and the client. There's an opportunity to regain revenue that's just assumed as lost. And Clocktimizer gives us that in this transparent, automated way. And again, I'm able to ensure there's attention in driving this through technology instead of me, a human being, hopefully knowing enough about project management descriptions to uncover these narratives. So one more step forward. Let's talk about block billing now, everybody's favorite narrative challenge. So this is another area that we rely on things such as semicolons, commas, maybe conjunctions, time intervals. In our billing team, we have our little list of things that indicate block billing. And lots of times, what we end up doing is simple find and replace. Oh, we have semicolons. I can replace these with commas. We have time intervals. Let me split these entries. These are all very input-output reactions. What we want is to not have block billing at all. And so Clocktimizer, once again, we're talking about that algorithm. It's saying, okay, yes, there's punctuation, but the human language includes descriptions of different activities. So I've created this report that says, show me all narratives where we see more than one activity according to the language. So let me give you a nice example of that. So look at this narrative here. Draft and revise opposition to motion to quash, draft engagement letter for local counsel, email counsel. Well, there are semicolons in here. So, that probably would have tipped it off to me. But Clocktimizer actually recognizes that there are 4 distinct activities in this mix. And so for the client to see the real value here, we want 4 entries that fully demonstrate the value our timekeeper, small Udal, has put in so that they pay those 5.3 hours in full. So I'm able to identify this beyond punctuation. I'm able to work with Small and explain, we need to improve this timekeeping. These should be 4 entries. Let's talk about the work you've done so that when Small enters their time the next day, they're able to replicate that process. And in the beginning, when you're trying to institute this kind of timekeeping improvement and oversight, it is onerous. Let's own that. But the long-term gains from investing and improving the timekeeping quality, having technology call out where those problems occur, how they occur, so you can demonstrate the impact to revenue and other firm metrics, that is the best way to ensure that we are improving our collection realization. Because it all starts with timekeeping. If I have a good, robust time entry that imparts value, the client's going to pay for it. And so our final use case around this narrative quality control is actually the quality itself. So Clocktimizer can give you insight beyond block billing, beyond activities, beyond keywords, to the actual quality of the narratives itself. Lots of times the only way we're able to do this is because we've read every single entry, and you have somebody who's experienced enough and nuanced enough to be able to determine the client's not going to like this. So I've created 2 reports here as examples. One is at a summary level. Think of this as like a higher audience, maybe a practice group leader or your billing manager. They want a hit list of which timekeepers are struggling with the content of their entries. Well, Clocktimizer gives that grade against time entry quality. And so where it's vague, there's not enough words or uncategorizable, the words are completely not helpful, I have my nice cheat sheet, I have my hit list. Who needs help? And in this case, Richard Fish in particular, we need to have a conversation with him. He may need some mentorship. And where I need that time card detail, if I have an owner of that mentorship, I can also set up a report, schedule it to be automated, daily, weekly, monthly, whatever it might be, so that I can review these time cards and I can explain to Richard that saying just call with opposing counsel, client doesn't know why that matters. What was this call about? Why does it matter to them? We need more words. Let's improve this. Let's take Richard from vague to good with a couple instances of examples that he can act upon. So, these are several different use cases I put together. They're drawn from those areas of outside counsel guideline compliance that often rely on very manual means or crowdsourced means to try to control and have some predictability around, and they're almost all very reactive. The biggest opportunity you get from Clocktimizer is that organizational centralization of information and adherence. And so I hope this inspires some ideas for those of you who use Clocktimizer currently, or for anybody who doesn't currently use Clocktimizer, you can see opportunity in this mix. And where you have questions or you want to have a conversation, please know we're excited to have that with you. And so with the time we have left, I want to open it up to any questions that anybody might have. So I do see a question. What was the step by step? Okay, so we are actually putting together some documentation, a nice overview of how Clocktimizer can help with outside counsel guideline adherence, but also that step-by-step instruction, that how-to guide for each of the use cases I've composed today. I believe you should be able to expect to receive that in the next week to 2 weeks. And so we'll be sharing that for everybody who attended, as well as anybody who wasn't able to make it. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Who determines if the narrative is vague? So this is actually relying on that natural language processing. It's built on technology, but it's built upon, I described getting input across the industry from all of our client firms. We're able to take that massive data source and be able to apply certain rules and understandings around it. And that is how we've been able to get to that determination of vague or uncategorizable. Essentially, there's no real activity in here other than other communication, and other communication isn't very distinct. And so this is a good example. How do we get to vague on this? Let's see. So there was a question, how are the block build activities corrected / caught? So yes, this is an automated report that you can set up. So all of these reports here, you're able to schedule them using the email update functionality, and you can determine your audience. Who do you want this to go to? Where would you like it routed? How often do you want to have it run? So you're able to schedule those depending upon whatever kind of need or audience you might have involved. And so that block billing question, essentially, I'm relying on, let me go back to that example. I'm relying on this qualifier, this filter about specificity. So it's asking how many activities were identified in this narrative. So it's not punctuation driven, it's those words and language that is being described. So I've said, show me all of those where there's more than one of these instances. So essentially, there's more than one, it's been block billed. And that's how I get to that kind of logic. Let's see. Forgive me, I'm scrolling through our questions. Okay, so I see a question in here asking, do we have a way to actually help with the review of outside counsel guidelines themselves? And that answer is yes. So at Latera, one of our helpful tools, Kira, it's a patented machine learning software. It specifically digs into contracts and documents. It allows you to identify, extract, and analyze information, and that includes outside counsel guidelines. So we can actually train Kira to review outside counsel guidelines and find all of those kind of specific parameters you need to know how am I going to get paid, what rules do I have to follow, and then you can join those up essentially with your hit list of I need to do this items and add a tool like Clocktimizer to give it some of that muscle. Okay, and I see one more question. Let's see. It's more of timekeeping system built for e-billing compliance. So I'd have a couple follow-up questions on that one, but to be clear, what Clocktimizer relies on is the timekeeping tables that are pulled from your financial system. So this is very much a helpful augmentation or complement to any kind of like initial time entry system you might be relying on. And again, because you have the natural language processing component, it can really build upon any of perhaps those kind of more universal punctuation, perhaps more pat rules that some of those systems rely on. So we see this as a very helpful complement opportunity to that scenario where you already have something in place. Okay, let me see, I have another question. Is there a broad capability for setting OCG violations across multiple clients, or is the staff intensive requiring a person to set rules for every matter or client number? So that's a great question. Thank you actually for asking this. So I had that same thought, like this could be a lot of maintenance, initial lift, but you're actually able to, let me go back to my reports, you're actually able to clone reports. So in a lot of ways, you could create a template. So you could set it at a client level, so it's inclusive of all matters within that client. You could build the report to that end, but you can also then create perhaps some template variations. Yes, you're going to have clients that get very specific, very unique, an absolute snowflake of a client in terms of requirements, but many will have the same 5 rules. So you can really create template reports, which you then mimic for your setups. So I get a new implementation or a new outside counsel guideline. If I was going to create a process, my next step would be, let's review whatever rules or compliance issues I have. Do I have the template that matches that? Yes. Let me clone, save, schedule, done. Okay. So we're over time now, and I don't want to overlook anybody's questions, so I will be reaching out after the fact to answer any that I haven't been able to address. Please know that you can reach out. We're excited to have these conversations with you. And I'm almost certain that based upon input and feedback, we're going to find other ways where Clocktimizer can be helpful to you long-term in this particular area of e-billing compliance and outside counsel guideline oversight. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has an excellent rest of their day.